I get to drag back one of our previous speakers, Ralph Grzebieta, and Raph has been drawn into, it says it's a myth. I'm not entirely convinced by that, because myth 5 is actually speed cameras are just about revenue raising. I'm not sure why it's prefaced with myth. I think what you're about to tell me is a bit of a Japanese whaling story, because the government's version is it's all about scientific research. So speed cameras, are they all about revenue raising? Well, let's have a look first. Let's have a ClickPad question, and we'll just see how you rate your answers to this. Increased enforcement of road rules has helped save how many lives in the last 20 years? Now, as a rough guide through the two great wars, Korea and Vietnam, 90,000 people, 90,000 Australians made the ultimate sacrifice. Since we kept records in 1925, 200,000 people have died on our roads. So, the answer to this question, you think, is 6,000. And how close are we?
Very close, spot on.
So well done. So, what do we know about speed cameras? What do they do for us? I think I've had that looked at by some thorough and probing investigative journalism. In fact, I think A Current Affair did a program on it, didn't they?
Yes, they did.
As I recall, Raph, and they called you Ralph.
That's right, yes.
There in itself lies the first problem. They weren't very flattering, were they? Do we have that clip that perhaps we could show people now?
Now to the ongoing debate over whether speed cameras actually save lives. While police say they help reduce the road toll, most of us think of them as government cash cows. Well, tonight we put them to the test.
We may never get the experts to agree, so we've decided to find out for ourselves. Do cameras really alter driver behaviour? So we hired a speed measurement company to test that theory. We tested 2 locations to see how fast drivers were travelling and how many were speeding. The first site has an obvious speed camera known to locals. At the speed camera site, you'd have to say drivers were pretty well behaved. The average speed was 59 kilometres an hour, and the number of people doing more than 4 k's an hour over the limit was just 0.5%, or 1 in 200. And those are roughly the same as police figures.
58.
The second site is a 60 zone with no cameras at all. Here's where things get interesting. At the non-camera site, a 60 zone, the average speed was 53 kilometres an hour. And the number of speeders, 0.5%, exactly the same as at the camera location. Based on those findings, the camera made no discernible difference to driver behaviour.
Well, I think we've answered that question, don't you?
Which of the following would you expect to produce more reliable results? 35 peer-reviewed trials and studies conducted by research centres around the world and evaluated in this paper, which concluded:
speed cameras are a worthwhile intervention for reducing the number of road traffic injuries and deaths.
Or a single uncontrolled experiment conducted by the 9 networks A Current Affair. So, naturally, when A Current Affair tackles
The ongoing debate over whether speed cameras actually save lives,
it would tell us about those reports, wouldn't it? Are you kidding? Not a word, not a dicky bird. Instead, we have Nick Etchells playing at being a scientist with a Mickey Mouse trial that would make a Year 9 student blush. In Australia, we called leading road safety research centres at Monash University, the Queensland University of Technology, the University of Adelaide, and the University of New South Wales. Check out their responses on our website. Some are extensive. But they're summed up by Dr. Stuart Newstead of Monash University Accident Research Centre.
There's no doubt that despite the fact that certain sections of the community don't like them, speed cameras do save lives.
By reinforcing those doubts with its absurd trial, A Current Affair is actively reducing public confidence in a programme that saves lives. That's about as irresponsible as the media can get.
Well, I'm still not convinced.
Oh, okay.
So, Raph, what can you tell me about speed cameras and red light cameras?
Okay, well, we've heard quite a bit already spoken about it, and you've seen the graphs, the reduction in the pedestrian fatalities, and likewise, there's another graph, and this shows you the red line, where the start of the red line starts to move upward is the number of infringements, and where the tolerance at the peak of, and the blue line are deaths on the Victorian roads. And at the peak of the deaths, which was up around, I think it was about 90,000 odd, the speed tolerance was reduced to 3 kilometres per hour. And of course, infringements went up, they spiked. But then after a while, they started to come down as people got used to the tolerance. But look at the blue line. That blue line is coming down in terms of fatality. So it's having a direct effect. Doesn't that convince you?
It's getting there, it's getting there.
I'll give you another fact. Wearing a seatbelt, for example, 99.6% of the population wears a seatbelt, yet that 0.4% shows up in 20 to 30% of our fatalities. It's that small percentage, and that's why this game is so tough. That's why it's really difficult. It's to get that 3 to 5 to 6% of you who don't think it has an effect to change, because it does have an effect.
Does that mean I'm in the 3% or am I in the bigger percent?
That's where you're heading.
Okay, so the object is to try and move people, a small number of people, into being more aware of the requirements. Is that the
That's
gist?
the whole idea, and that's what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is to get to make sure that people are aware of the consequences, because the consequences are devastating. It's the greatest killer of our young people in terms of unintentional injury. Likewise, it's killed the most amount of people above the number of fatalities in all the wars that Australia has fought. The same goes in the US. Any country you look at, it's about double the number. So yes, we've got to try and keep at it, and I've got to try and convince people like you to ease off of that pedal and drive within the speed limit.
It's funny, when we start talking about numbers, I noticed that all of the Americans that died in Vietnam, they lose more Americans on the road each year than they did in the entire Vietnam conflict. So
yes, 40,000 a year.
We sometimes put those numbers out of our mind. I think in some respects we going back to the old days as we started the introduction, we have a level of acceptance. Is that the case?
That's right. We get very comfortable at travelling at higher speeds and with not perceiving the risk. And the problem is we can't feel kinetic energy. We just don't feel it. But we do feel it when we crash. That's when we feel it. And I'm sure, at least I've had a couple of bingles, I've had a couple of crashes, unavoidable ones, and I feel really bad for about 2 or 3 days afterwards. It shakes your system if you haven't got the appropriate. Fortunately, I had seat belts, I had the crumple zones and all that, and it all worked well. But you still feel quite shaken by it because the kinetic energy suddenly comes at you and it hits you in the face.
One of the interesting things in it, of course, I look at the warranty on my new car. Nowhere does it guarantee me my airbag will deploy, and nowhere does it guarantee me that my anti-lock brakes will work. I'm starting to come around to you, but what about the audience? Do we have some questions?
Well, can I give you 2 more quotes?
Go.
Okay, Victorian Auditor General's report. Okay, they didn't believe him in Victoria. And he said the road safety camera program is effective. It is well supported by evidence that clearly demonstrate that cameras improve road safety and reduce road trauma. Citing of cameras is based on road safety outcomes, not to raise revenue. A strong body of research shows road safety cameras improve the behaviour of road users and reduce speeding and road crashes. And then we have the New South Wales Auditor General's report. Right, so that's 2 separate independent studies. In general, speed cameras change driver behaviour and have a positive road safety impact. We found that the number of speeding offences and the total number of crashes, injuries and fatalities reduced after the introduction of fixed speed cameras. So how about those 2 reports? Can I convince you with those?
I'm getting beaten up here, people. I need a hand. All right, let's go for some questions from the floor. Thank you.
Throughout this discussion, we seem to have made no differentiation between rural areas and the metropolitan area. In the metropolitan area, to my mind, most of the time, we're only driving from one set of lights to the next. But by far, the majority of real accidents, fatalities, are in the hills and rural areas, not in the metropolitan area. Isn't that right?
Not entirely. Yes, we have more severe crashes in the country areas, and when it comes to urban crashes, however, you've got vulnerable road users. You've got pedestrians, you've got cyclists and motorcyclists as well. So you've got a real issue there as well, is that it's not necessarily so. They're more severe in the urban, rural areas because you're at higher speeds. And people fatigue, of course, falling asleep. That's another major issue which we need to be concerned with.
And another question here on the floor, sorry.
We're looking at the moment in Australia at media ethics, and we're looking, I think, at sort of the means by which they attract their so-called information. But there seems to me, and this was highlighted in the Media Watch episode, that there's a media ethics of they like to play up the idea of a big, nasty, greedy government, regardless of what the facts are. And it seems to me that there's probably, maybe the people who watch Current Affair, how many of them also watch Media Watch would be interesting, so that there is not the alternative. And it seems to me that this is a time where we need to look broader at media ethics and the ethics of the very sort of information, used very loosely, that is in fact presented to people.
I fully support that. And in fact, the two TV stations seem to be the ones that are sort of trying to move up the controversy. And it's The Current Affair is one, and the other one is Today Tonight. They seem to be the two that really do the damage. And that's why I've been criticised by a number of my co-expert colleagues not to take interviews with either of those two stations, but I do, for the simple reason that you have to actually get across to that 1 million viewers that do watch those programs to try and get across the message. Otherwise, if we just back away from that, then what's going to happen is we're going to wind up with people, you know, really believing the mythology, and we've got to break this myth.
All right, I think there's a question at the top here.
Yeah, me again. I kind of have two things to say. You're after that 3 to 6%. I noticed that somebody asked a question about reaction time, suggesting that young people have better reaction time and what have you. But statistically, am I not right that the older people, despite the fact that they have slow reaction time, don't tend to have the high-speed accidents? They tend to have more bingles? Am I correct in that?
Yes and no. It varies. Yes, of course, there are a lot less older pedestrians being killed, but they are overrepresented in the data in terms of their number of registrations and in terms of kilometres travelled. It's actually sort of like a U-shape. It starts at, well, when you first get your licence, in terms of the number of people being at risk and being killed, and then it goes along up until you start to get above sort of my age, when it starts to go up because your eyes fail. One of the issues is perceiving and being able to notice a car coming or a truck coming at you, or some situation that's occurring in the distance. It's all about eyesight and perceiving and reacting and having the capacity to be able to do that quickly.
All right.
To make is that I'd kind of like to see another campaign go out there for people, not so much that the driver is the one that tends to get hurt. Am I not right when it's a full car? It tends to be the passengers that are the ones that cop it. And are they a higher fatality rate than the drivers in this high-speed type accidents?
Actually, it's the front seat drivers that are at most risk. And that's why we've got the airbags, and the pretensioners tend to focus on the front. The rear-seated passengers tend to be not as exposed to the amount of kinetic energy and crash energy that's coming through.
All right. Well, I think we might have to leave it there. So I get to ask the last question. Raph, be honest with me. Speed cameras. Are they all about revenue raising?
Absolutely not. They're about safety.
Let's see what my friend says.
Well, I think we've answered that question, don't you?
Yes, I think we have. Ladies and gentlemen, Grzebieta.